Welcome to today's Social System Mapping on-ramp session for today, July 13th, 2020. This is the first in a monthly series of community of practice sessions. The first one is this one, the on-ramp, which is an introductory level. It's not, this is for people who just either want to see each other's maps. They're used to mapping, but they want to see each other's maps just to get ideas, like Jim is here. In that kind of a capacity, and then, but also for people who've never seen a social system map, because it's kind of hard to really get what's going on with one without actually seeing one. So this is, as I said, an intro. Today we're going to have Alex Abell present the Knoxville Innovation Ecosystem Map. On the third Monday of every month, we have a deep dive conversation, which is something that usually grows out of the conversation from the on-ramps, something that people want to dig into more. This month on the 20th, we're going to dig into thinking about Kumu presentations and how to use Kumu presentations to tell stories with our maps. The fourth Monday, we usually have a tech talk. That's for the geeky portion of our community who likes to, the people who set up sumApp and make the maps. And for that, we usually address either a feature of sumApp that we know is not being used very much because it's kind of esoteric, but it's really cool, or new features as we develop them, or how to do cool things in Kumu using the sumApp data. So on the 27th, we're going to talk about, so we recently added a new feature that enables you to combine two projects, a project mapping people and a project mapping organizations. And, but there's various ways of going about that. Before we had that feature, people would do it in certain ways. And so I just want to talk about the various approaches, because you don't have to use the dual elements to get at that, but it kind of depends on your context. So we'll talk more about that on the 27th. I see, hang on. Okay, so I'm gonna continue. So another thing, announcement, we're now doing I'm now doing office hours, which is every Thursday from 5 to 5:30 p.m. Central. You can just, I'm at my desk and I have my Zoom open, and anybody who wants to can just pop in and ask me questions or tell me what they're thinking. And if there's more of us, we can, it'll be a first come, first serve. And if it's a burning thing, we'll get to that first, but we can then also just have open-ended chat with each other. So, and the link to that Zoom will be in our Slack team. Also, if I have to cancel, I'll put it in Slack. Okay, so for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Christine Capper. I'm co-founder of sumApp and Greater Than the Sum, and today I'll be facilitating the session and facilitating the questions and answers. And we have this concept of the three hats that making a social system map really requires three different perspectives, which are the visioning perspective, the technical perspective, and the sense-making perspective. I wear all three of them, although mostly I let Tim, my partner and spouse, do the technical parts. Okay, so for today's agenda, we're gonna do some chat intros in a minute, and then we're gonna look at Alex's map, and then we're gonna have questions and answers. And one of the things that we do with these weekly sessions is most of the time, if I'm available or Tim is available, the session is a formal hour, so it'll stop at the top of the hour and we will say, thank you for coming and so nice to have you and goodbye. But for anyone who has more they want to talk about or some questions that they want to address right now, I will stick around, or Tim or whomever will stick around for an extra half hour just to have open-ended conversation. So if you just want to hang out and hear what other people are asking or just whatever, feel free to do that after we close at the top. And we will be doing that today. So for chat intros, is everybody able to, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I want to see, how come it's not stopping? I want to see, Mauricio, welcome. Can we hear you? Just wanted to make sure I saw the top of your head in my little thing. Just wanted to hear your voice briefly. Great. Hi, welcome.
Hi, Christine. Thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to learning on this community of practice.
Great.
Happy to be here.
Great, thanks. Okay, so everybody, let's go into the chat. And first of all, put in your name, pronoun, and location. Stephen, I didn't know you were in Minneapolis. I am too. And Peru. Great, cool. So we have a big spread geographically. Okay, now the next one might take a minute to think about. But the question is, if you could weave a network of your own defining, like a network that you define, doesn't have to exist in the world, what would be its purpose and what kinds of people would it include?
Can you repeat it once more for posterity's sake?
If you could weave a network of your own defining, like your fantasy network to weave, what would be its purpose and what kinds of people would it include? And thank you for that prompt, Alex. And if you don't want to answer this, you don't have to. There are no command performances in any way. So if you're comfortable. And then I'm hoping that you're reading each other's. I like Gladys, a really diverse group of weird and caring folks. That's a good one. And then when you're done, how about if you go to the, if you know how to do this, if you look at the, open up the participants, I think there's a hand, you can, let's see, say yes, put your green yes checkbox. So I know we're done.
Where's the checkbox?
Click on the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom.
Gotcha.
Okay. Empathy tech.
This is a fun question.
Always the branding guy over here.
Collaboration. I'll have to look into Swarm Creativity. I don't think I've seen that. Okay. I think we've got everybody. Well, unintended consequences of technology. That's good. Is that a, oh wait. Okay, thank you so much. So these are so in my wish for everybody, for all of you, would be that you have, like, the force be with making those networks. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at the Slack or at the chat, with making those networks and weaving those connections that you would like to do. Okay, so Alex is going to present a map that he's made. And I'm gonna, so I'm just gonna hand it over to Alex Abell of Lunchpool, and he can tell you a little bit more about himself and then share his map with you. And you can start sharing your screen whenever you want, Alex. Or, yeah.
And Christine, do you want to give a little quick intro on how we met? Because of course the lawnmower guy is outside and just in this area. So I'll just be like maybe 3 minutes when you won't hear all this crazy noise.
Okay, well, I don't know that I have 3 minutes, and maybe my memory of how we met is different than your memory of how we met, but it was probably a couple years ago, if not more. So in my memory, you had been, you were working on a project for Lunchpool, and your, sort of your Lunchpool business model and how you were gonna pull the technology together, and you were doing some research to see what was already out there. And sumApp was one of a possible set of things you might be able to cobble together. And so you wanted to talk about that, and you reached out and you talked to, and we had a call. And since then we have, you've made some sumApp maps, and you and I have been part of a sort of tech exploration group. And we've stayed in touch ever since, and are still sort of talking about technical collaboration, whatever that could possibly mean someday, some way. So welcome, Sonia. Let's just see if we've got your voice. If we can hear you. Is that a yes?
Good morning. And it's actually Christy Gabbard. I just need to change the name, but good morning.
Oh, okay. Morning,
welcome.
Christy.
Morning.
Morning, Christy. Hi. Okay, Alex, is your lawnmower? I don't think I could hear it anyway, so let's go.
Okay, yeah. Can you guys hear me okay? And can you not, hopefully you don't hear background noise, so thanks. I switched mics, so that way, that might help. Always perfect timing. So as Christine said, we met, I came across sumApp back in, I don't even know when. I started the startup in November of 2018. And it was shortly thereafter that I got sucked into the wild world of network weaving, social systems mapping, and everything related to that. And I started the startup because, I am a network weaver. I didn't know it when I started it, but, I'm the kind of person that is always trying to build reciprocity. I believe in the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated, and how that creates a better world. If we all do that, then we're all taking care of each other. And so I noticed at work, I was in a corporate job, people weren't connecting. We were all just kind of glued to our computers, our phones, our work. And so I set out to create something that would help people build the kind of connections that are built over lunch, which I jokingly called your lunch pool. It's like the people that you carpool with back and forth to lunch, and you build those deep empathic connections. The platinum, I need to learn about the platinum rule. We'll have to talk about that later. And so, this journey, learning more, and I still consider myself very much a novice as far as the theory and everything behind systems mapping. And I've leaned pretty heavily on Christine and other, people that are deep into the practice. But I just wanted to give you that little bit of background, because I'm all about using technology in meaningful ways and intentional ways to help people connect, because I think right now it's very disconnected, and I think it can be different. It can be a facilitation, as many of you know, with the mapping and what we're doing, what a lot of us are doing to help grow that. So just to give you a quick background, when I first found out about Kumu, I didn't know about sumApp yet. And as my first kind of foray, I downloaded all of my LinkedIn data, and I found out very quickly how unruly Kumu can sometimes be with huge data sets. And I felt like the world's biggest egocentrist being at the middle of this little, universe of connections that I wanted to build. And then I found out about Kumu. I started the first trial of what I'll show you guys today. And you can see I decided to have fun with it at the beginning to see, it's lunch related. So how could we find on my team? We weren't really, it was a scrappy team. We were working hard, but we all had part-time, we were doing it part-time. We had full-time jobs. And so I was thinking, okay, how can we figure out who likes what food, and we can invite each other to lunch. So just kind of a first foray into it. Then I got a little bit smarter, or a little bit more advanced with it. I lean pretty heavily on Tim. If you know Tim, you know, Christine and Tim are great. Christine knows all the theory and a lot of the tech, but Tim can really help you with the styling and digging into the tech, you know, the technology and how to format things and do what you want it to do, or get the tools to do what you want them to do. And so I used one of their example maps to kind of get a little bit more advanced. So not just how do we identify what foods people like in common, but how do we really look at the strength of the connections? How do we say, you know, I use the Facebook group that I'm in Tampa Bay to build out this and to invite people to the network. So you can look and say, okay, I've got a deep connection with Merle, who's actually my accountability partner now, Phil, Vadim, and Pooja. And I defined the deep connection based on the number of times that we did go to lunch together. So again, I just always use the lunch stuff to kind of play around with the social capital that exists between people. And you can see the potentials for strengthening those connections. And you can see kind of like on LinkedIn, a lot of the second degree connections. So whereas, you know, I've noticed that there's a lot of really great work with, in terms of nonprofits, but I wanted to bring some of that great work into the, you know, the private sector, B2B, also nonprofits who we serve. We recently did an event with the called the Network Innovation Summit, and seeing some of the big problems that can be solved with this science inspired me, because I want to bring it to the mainstream. I want to, you know, figure out how to build network weavers that may not even know what a network weaver is, like I was a year ago. And as I go through, if you guys have any questions, I think, you know, feel free to jump in, because I'll talk your ears off. So, and Christine, you too, pull me in. And so all that's the background that brings me to my most recent project, which was how do we really build a network in a space, a geographic area that's already starting to form networks. If you've seen kind of the different network types, where you have kind of the very fragmented network, and then you have kind of a hub and spoke model, and leading towards the core periphery, where it's just a very leaderful, very tightly packed network where everyone knows everyone, and the resources that everyone has and everyone needs are clearly defined. That's kind of what I wanted to help build in my backyard of Knoxville, Tennessee. My wife is at the University of Tennessee, so we moved here not too long ago. And this map even helps me to know who can I lean on to help with this specific project. And so the way that this view, the way it works is that it's very similar with, we survey people and we ask, you know, how connected are you with one another? How many times have you met? Have you actively collaborated on a project? Are you actively meeting? And even to the extent of I would like to meet with these people. So, like, you know, it indicates interest, and you can find out who would like to go grab a lunch with you to talk about the work that you're doing.
Alex.
Yes.
For those in the group who haven't seen sumApp, this might be actually a good just to go to just to the connection tiles and just show them how you're surveying briefly.
Sure, definitely. Yeah, let me pull up my survey. I just realized my sumApp let me in. I don't know if I just got a new credit card, so I don't know if I'm like a bad customer right now, but let me pull up my link. Knox. Here, I'll pull up my specific link, and you can see the kind of survey questions I asked. Let's see. And you can see the data points too if you click on one of the person's names. There we go.
Is this a public map or a private map, Alex?
This is a public map.
So the group could actually go and look at it online.
Yeah, you could go and look at it, and I could share it out in the chat. If you guys wanted to check it out for yourselves, but let me see. There's the link. But yeah, I wanted to know, the reason that I kind of sparked this project in the first place was to Techstars, you guys may be familiar with them. They're an organization that, you know, supports a lot of startups, accelerators, and things like that. And they were coming to town, and they were doing an assessment of the innovation of the area, and they were doing just in-person, very qualitative surveys, which I think are great, but it wasn't. You know, I figured it can be done faster. It can be done faster and in real time, which is what really drew me to sumApp in the first place. So. And I can't pull up that survey, but I can send it out later, like a screenshot or something. But, you know, basically I just asked the basic information, but I also asked of the entrepreneurial support organizations in the area, which ones are you affiliated with? Which ones do you recognize? Which ones are you connected with? What kind of an innovation ecosystem persona are you? So are you someone that's with the university? Are you an entrepreneur? Do you work at, you know, an accelerator or incubator? Are you a part of the government, or are you what we consider an innovation enabler? And so, you know, this is all really depends on how you define it. And then I love, you know, I think Christina was the one that introduced me to this, but things you can offer and skills you can offer and skills that you need. And so, you know, that helps you identify what resources are available in the network and which ones. And I apologize, you guys probably already know this, but again, I was green coming into all this, so it's fascinating to me. And then, you know, which events have you participated? The big events that are in the area. Which news sources do you follow? And so the plan is for the future to incorporate a lot of this to help people find the resources that they could use to benefit them in you know, strengthening their role in the innovation ecosystem.
Alex, can I ask a question?
Sure.
What's this universe of entities that you've sent this out to, or that are on this map, and why are the ones that are connected versus the ones that are not? So in other words, what's sort of the promotional scheme that you've used to reach out to people and encourage them to map themselves?
Great question. So yeah, excellent question. So yeah, I can see a lot of the challenges are in mapping are how do you get the people? You know, like especially if you're coming into an ecosystem that you need that kind of mass to send out to. So the way I do it, I was really lucky because my startup pivoted into virtual events. We were doing, you know, we started out to get people around in-person tables, and we found a technology that allowed us to do that virtually. It's kind of like Zoom, but each table has its own breakout and attendees can move freely. And so we got invited to do a ton of events in Knoxville, and I had that list of people that came to those events. And so the events that were, you know, the Knoxville Technology Council, there was some entrepreneur or Knoxville Entrepreneur Center, these events that had those people that were part of the ecosystem. I used that as a starting point and just reached out to everyone and said, hey, I've got this new tool. Would you like to be a part of it? And so these are the ones that said they wanted to opt in, but they haven't filled it out yet. So all these people should, in theory, be part of this, you know, connective map. They just haven't. I need to send a follow-up email to get them included. Great question.
So wait, Alex. So you those are all opt-ins. They don't come from a preconceived list. So that would.
Well, no, sorry. These are. They've agreed to do it, but I didn't use the opt-in. I basically just emailed everybody.
Okay.
I believe in something called like semi-automation. So I wanted to make sure I had consent before sending it out to everyone. And so I use it was like a mail merge tool, and I had a list and just said, hey, I've got you from one of these events. Would you be interested in joining this map? And so it was kind of a you know, homebrew opt-in.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And it's good. It was good to have them on there because even though they haven't participated, their name's still on the list, and other people can connect with them.
Yep.
And then Jim, you had asked about the connective, the edges between the nodes, And so basically on the connections tab in sumApp, you can ask people to self-report how they're connected. So
Alex, I texted you your link privately.
oh, thank you.
It chatted you your link.
Perfect. Yep,
There
we go. So I think it's one thing that I've realized is it's good to, you know, really be clear with what you're trying to do in the description as people come in. People, you know, some people read stuff, some people don't. So I kind of broke down the connections tab. What is this? How does it work? How you can come back. I mean, I tried to use some Tennessee talk, which is, you know, y'all come back now, you hear. And then how we use the data. So it's going to be in private, but then I actually need to update that because I notified everybody that it is going to be public, because I had some people say, hey, I'd rather this be public, put my information out there. So I need to go and update that. But then you upload your photo, and then you go in and answer the survey questions. So, you know, some pretty basic stuff. I didn't want to make it too terribly long, but I did want to get some good information. And so like I'm not part of all these, so I just checked what I'm part of to kind of test it out. And then as Jim asked, the connections tab to me is like is the amazing part of this tool that Christine has created, or that, you know, she and her partners have created. It's amazing, because whereas before, you know, I was basically asking people, hey, are you connected to this person? Are you connected to that person? But now everyone that's on the list, you can come in and you can say, Lynn Flatford. I do not know them, so I'm not going to do anything with that. But if I did, I could say I'm currently meeting with them regularly. And then, like I said, I always like to put the fun little coffee and lunch stuff in there. And so I could say I had coffee with them, I grabbed lunch with them before. And so what it gives you, this is really the connective part that's important to me, at least for right now. And as people self-report on that, it updates in real time. So, you know, these red lines, which I call lunch buddies, they're the people that are currently meeting regularly. And so it gives you a good idea of, you know, it is the map. So it's, you know, if I wanted to meet with Tom, I sized everyone by the length of time that they've self-reported being part of the ecosystem. So Tom, for example, writes a very popular blog locally that's widely read. He's with a big company that supports the innovation ecosystem, and you can actually see who he's got the strongest connections with. So if I wanted to meet Tom, you know, similar to like LinkedIn, if I know Marilyn, I could say, hey, Marilyn, can you give me an introduction to Tom, because I want to talk to him about X. Another piece that's been really helpful is these interests, because then you can, you know, if you have an interest and that's what you want to discuss, then you can really go and say, okay, well, I'm interested in clean energy, for example. Well, he's not interested in clean energy, I suppose. But he is. There are a few people, but he's not connected to Nathan Brady or Kurt Wibberley. So there's an opportunity for them to collaborate on a clean energy project. And you can you know, filter down to a few, and you can see the connections that exist in relationship to those particular interests. And I also I have a couple in progress, and I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts too on how to do this. But this is a big jumbled up mess. But the plan is to organize by those different personas. So like the government institutions that support the innovation ecosystem, the ESOs or entrepreneur support organizations. And then, you know, with the lunch questions, just having an ability to find the people that you could or should, or it would be valuable for you to go to lunch with in relation to the work that you're doing. So yeah, I mean, we just started this a month ago, and there's a good bit of data in there already. So I'm looking to really grow this and see, you know, what is the entire ecosystem, and how are people connected, and how can we identify those network weavers or the network leaders like Tom, and also identify the people, because another feature of sumApp mixed with Kumu is that you can survey over time. So I could have a new time, or I'm planning to have a new timestamp for July, August, into each month, and you can see how it's growing and who are the members of the community that are building that connective tissue. So that was a lot of talking. I'm curious to hear from you guys. What do you think? Are there ways that I could improve this based on my mission of trying to connect people into that very tight network? Would you see yourself using something like this for your work?
So I'll read you a couple of the, I just want to make one quick comment, which is when you talked about structuring the people around their interests. I don't know if you were thinking of it, but you could easily just do a cluster around interests, and then it would take you 2 minutes once you figure out where that is in Kumu. So that'd be a great view to have, just to cluster on interest. And then I would suggest that you ping Tim to tell you how to cluster on offers and asks, because you can put them together so that you can see who's connected as an offerer and who's connected as an asker. Okay, but questions in the chat. Vincenz wants to know, how do you balance privacy concerns in a public map?
I think that's a great question. I think it's just being very, very clear. I mean, obviously, I have their email addresses, but I would not share that on their profile. But if they shared their LinkedIn profile or one of their social media profiles, I think it's just a matter of making it clear what will be shared to the public and what's going to be, private and behind the scenes. So, I think to answer your question kind of succinctly, I think it would be just a matter of making sure that everyone knows what they're opting into, being very clear and deliberate about how it's going to be shared and displayed. Good question.
Yeah. And then Gladys is interested in, how do you use data from big public sources like LinkedIn and Facebook? And so maybe Gladys, that's a sort of a different technical process, and it actually is really tedious. So the how piece is not.
I would actually love to. Yeah, I would love to learn that too, because it's one of my goals is to pull that data in. But yeah, it's a whole beast of a different color.
Yeah, and it's not possible anymore. It used to be possible, but because that's where we started, was using LinkedIn relationship data, and took a lot of wrangling. Tim had to write a whole ton of code to do a bunch of stuff.
The stuff I did with LinkedIn, it was the result of a few different like web scraper tools with people in my network, and it was pretty beastly.
Yeah, and LinkedIn, you have to use web scrapers now, because LinkedIn closed down their API to regular people. So we used to be able to export it, but we can't anymore.
It'd be great to do a deep dive on that at some point.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of interest around that.
Yeah.
Since the networks exist.
Well, and just before we get to the next question, I will say one of the reasons I started this was because I truly believe that hoarding the data, which a lot of technology companies do, it gives them a lot of power.
Yeah.
But it basically consolidates all that power, and that's how you get the problems like we have now with Cambridge Analytica and things like that. They can influence consumer behavior because they have that data, and so it should really be accessible by the people is my theory. So
yeah, that was, and thanks for saying that, Alex, because that was that was one of the original impulses. Like when we first started doing this kind of mapping, it was like yes, the politics in the power related to who gets to control who accesses whose data was just a thing that I was, we really wanted to break that and make it so that it's the data is in the hands of the people, not the power hoggers. So yeah. So next question. Jim asks about he says creating more density, each one personally invite one. So that's a suggestion or a thought about how to, Jim, do you want to say some more about that?
Yeah.
No, you were talking about how do you pull people in, and the personal invitation is really powerful. So maybe encouraging people to do that.
No, yeah. I think that's great feedback. And I think, because that's my theory is that if I reach out to somebody and it's very personalized and says, hey, Jim, I'm doing this map, I'd love to have you involved, then you're more likely to. But in order to grow it exponentially, just asking, say, hey, Jim, you were a part of this. Would you invite someone else just like I invited you? I think that's huge.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then Eric asks, he's curious, what are you learning about how people use this so far?
I've heard from some of the people that have participated so far that they were able to actually find people. Well, for one thing, to reconnect with people. There's one of the options is I used to meet with them regularly, and so they were able to reconnect with people that they may have lost touch with, which was kind of nice. In order to to pick back up projects that may have fallen off. And then alternatively, I've heard from kind of that LinkedIn style. Oh, well, I need to know Christine, and Jim knows Christine, so let me ask Jim if he can introduce me to Christine, and even having the data points to say, and here's some of the relevant work that we could discuss, and here's kind of what I want to discuss specifically.
One of the things I've seen that happens is if you can see all the connections, is it actually takes you a step past the asking for an introduction. So for instance, you can like sort of figure who's the best one to ask an introduction from based on how strongly they're connected to the person you want to find and how strongly you're connected to them. But I've also done, and I've seen a number of people do this, where you look on the map and you start to identify people not only by their interests, but by their connections. So for instance, once I was looking on this map and there was a guy who was really near me on the map, and I did not know him. I did not know his name. I was like, who is this guy? He's connected. He's like strongly connected with the strongest connection type to like 90% of the people I'm strongly connected to. And, and I'm like, well, if he is so close to those people whom I love profoundly, and they're working with him, he's got to be great, right? Yeah. So, I mean, there's just no way he's not. So I just reached out and said, hey, who are you? I want to know. I'm looking at my map and I'm seeing where you are in relation to me, and could we get together for coffee? And we had several great meetings. And so you can actually take it to that step. Once you see who knows who, like a friend of my friend, it starts to tell you more about that person also.
Like that. I wish I would have had that in college, because my wife and I, now we've been married for 5 years, but when we met, we found out that we had about 30 to 40 of the same friends, and we just never met on this 2-year period. So it'd be nice to have seen it on the map and said, hey, I need to know you.
You found each other though, which
exactly,
is good.
Yeah.
So then Steph asks, and I'll take this one. It sounds like you're the system admin, and so what determines what is public versus private, or does everyone have control to share data or keep private? So this is in sumApp. So he's gathering his data in sumApp, which is the data gathering front end piece of this. He could hypothetically ask everybody to give their data and then just not do anything with it, or just keep it for himself. He could. That would be pretty obvious, because if you don't make a map with the data, then what are you doing with the data? So you have to provide some kind of something to show for why you're asking. Otherwise you're going to look suspicious, because it doesn't have its own, like with Facebook, it's got its own intrinsic motivation that people are now connecting. And so you're doing it not because someone's asking you to, but just because it's there, and then someone can take that data and use it. But what normally happens, and what is the intention, is that then they take that data and put it into a map, and then the map is shared with the whole network, so that everything except for like some the system ID or the email that you're using to ping them with is shared in the map. And I'd say 75 to 90% of the maps that people who use sumApp create are private. So the data is only shared within the network itself. You can see everybody who's in the network, so those are the people who are seeing your data. It can't be seen beyond that, and everybody can see everybody's data. So it's true that, you know, like there isn't like a functional technical way of getting at all the data in a network from sumApp if you have just used it, but there's no reason to do that. And there, I mean, there's not, and people wouldn't play along. So I think that's, is you want to, Stephen, is there more to that question that I haven't gotten at? Steph, is it Stephen or Steph? Steph, sorry. Okay, thanks. And let's just, we've got another, let's say 10 minutes. Let's just, if you want to just, you know, if people want to just make comments, or we don't have to do it all in the chat. I think we should just open it up. But Jim asks, have you done any, Jim, I'll let you ask. I'll stop interpreting.
I was just wondering if, so the value proposition you've offered to people is to be able to connect through the map. Have you done any sense making at the community-wide level of saying, okay, so we're a community of people, what is this map showing us?
Definitely. No, I haven't, but that's definitely one of the goals, is to explore not only for the individuals in the community, but for the community itself, the community leaders. I know it's there's 3 big institutions in Knoxville that are very interested in growing that innovation community, and so, you know, they have their specific agendas for it, but learning from the community, what resources do you want to see? What you know, what is the importance of this connection and connectivity beyond just, you know, grabbing lunch with somebody, which you know, I think is important to have lunches. But yeah, that's definitely what I think is the next step. And just to address Steph's question briefly, one of the things that I realized, because you know, this whole thing was is a big experiment for me to see, you know, for one thing, how can I learn more about network science, but also, you know, how can I use technology to connect people? And you saw on the landing page, I still need to update that copy to where it said it'll be a private network. And I actually sent out an email clarifying that, because I had someone push back and they said, well, I don't want to be part of it if it's a private network. I want it to be open to everybody. And I was like, well, that's why I started this. So actually that's helpful, because my plan was to keep it private and then unlock it. But we were getting requests to just keep it open the whole time. So I think, you know, that kind of inspired me to go that route.
Steph, just another piece of that public-private is that then the way sumApp is designed. So if you you gather the data in sumApp, you visualize it in Kumu. You could visualize it in another tool as well, but Kumu is the most accessible one for a network to work with. And then you take an embed of the map and you put it back into sumApp. So what you're doing is when you're asking people to give their data, you're automatically giving them access to the map. So they don't have to go somewhere else. You don't have to give them a password and send them elsewhere. You just, as they're in there, they can then see the map. So the interface, it also then means that when they're looking at the map and they see new people that are on the map that they didn't connect to before because they hadn't been on the map before, they can then go back, go say, oh, Sally joined. I'm going to go and find her in the connections and say how I know her. So, so it becomes its own sort of contained space for the network to see whatever's going on in real time, and it's updated in real time. So that's the other piece of the public-private part that I forgot to say. Who else has a comment or a question?
I have a kind of 2-part question to kind of add on to some other people's questions. I'm curious how you keep information like real time, like how to keep folks coming back to update their data. And then 2, how do you recommend going out and asking people all the questions up front, or do you ask them a few simple ones up front and then ask them more questions as they see more value in the map?
Definitely. No, that's a great question. So, I mean, I just threw it all out there to see what happened. As far for the second part of your question, I said, hey, here's everything, answer what you will. But as far as keeping them coming back, I think that could be a good approach to start, you know, with some simple questions. As they add value, add more questions and let them know. But because my focus was really the connectivity piece, I love in sumApp, there's a feature or there's an email template built in called New Faces. And so if you're part of this, especially the way I've structured it, people are intensely curious to know who else is in there. They have it's their MO as these type of people that will self-report their connections. It's in their wheelhouse to be curious about who else is there that they could connect with or report that they're connected with. So I think just periodically reaching back out, letting them know, hey, there's new faces, go see who's in there, is pretty powerful. But there's a fine line because, my background is in marketing and you can't exhaust your list because you can't ask people to do this weekly. Or, I mean, maybe you can depending on your network, but I would imagine monthly or bi-monthly or, there's a right cadence of asking people to update. But then also making it accessible and letting them know you can update this at any time. Save that link and that is your link.
Yeah.
Good questions.
Yeah. I'll add just a little to that. I think it really, I mean, I don't know if I've done 100 of these, but I've certainly done several dozen maps in different contexts. And it really depends on the context and the network and the goals of the network. So that, I mean, I think the concept of starting small and adding, if you have an intention to continue to use the map for sense making and to like sort of create a mindset that when you're planning or when you're strategizing, it's part of the process is to go back to the map and see what questions the map can help you generate that could help inform your strategies or your planning. So if you have an intention to do that, or if you if you have an intention to continually check back and look deeper collectively at what the network. So this is more for networks that are more purpose-driven or more have an action orientation and a working together to achieve specific goals. In that kind of a context, sense making to discover what more we would like to know and don't yet know, and then using that to add more questions just makes the whole thing more collaborative, more emergent, and more alive. But it depends on the context, and there are a lot of contexts where that's too much. That's just not going to work. So you might as well just get it all in there right up front. So just really, really, it's there, like for anything you could do, any answer you could give, there's probably 5 different equally good answers depending on your context and depending on the goals of the network and the maturity of the network, etc.
Yeah, definitely.
So, another question or comment?
Well, I'll just add to that
Yep.
briefly. That is one of the questions originally. I think whenever I first embarked upon this experiment, I reached out to a couple of people that are pretty invested in growing the innovation ecosystem. And, when I showed them an example map that I created before, that was their question. Like, what is the action that's going to arise from this? Like, is it just a pretty map of the people? Because they're like, I love maps. As much as the next person, but what's going to be the outcome, of people participating. And so I think that there's a good balance of like deductive and inductive research to say, my goal is to explore the innovation ecosystem and to start doing some of that sense making. But as far as specific actionable incomes, that's part of the exploration, is figuring out what are the outcomes that we can take. Because I think the higher level goal is to build a thriving ecosystem. So, you just brought that up in my head, Christine. I was like, well, the actions will come hopefully from building mapping out the network.
Alex, Vincenz asked a question in this chat. In what way is a map like this superior to a database and using filters? That's a totally great question. So
it is a great question.
Yeah.
I think, it is a great question. So I think that for me, from where I come from, I think the visual nature of it can help bring out a few use cases that you couldn't get from a network. I mean, if it was a graph database, then we're talking similar, apples and apples. But if you're talking about like a tabular database, I've been in roles where I stared at spreadsheets all day long, and you can filter and you can see the list of people, but being able to see the connections and see, because of the connections, where they land in proximity to one another. Because as Christine pointed out earlier, with the person that had so many connections in common with her, you can see that, and now it's hard to visualize or even imagine something like that whenever you're in a spreadsheet. And so I think there's that, and I think there's also just, you know, the ability to quickly move around to do some of that sense making. If you can see all the data points here as you're moving around, it helps visualize it a little bit. So the analogy that I'll use is, if I need to go from Knoxville to St. Paul, for example, I have two things I could do. I can look at the kind of street by street view. On, like, I'm using, like, my example is GPS, so Google Maps. I can look at kind of that step-by-step direction, or I can look at it visually and have that extra context that the map provides. So I think it's just like that as far as mapping and looking at data points.
Cool. So let's have one more. So Steph, there is not a Twin Cities public map that you can join. So I would like us to make one someday in some context, but we don't have one. Sorry about that. And then Christine, do you want to say your question to Alex?
Oh, sure. It's just a simple one, kind of, I guess. I'm assuming that based on Vicent's question, this map is built on a database. So you can have option C, you can see the data both ways.
Yeah, so the way that Kumu works is you can actually, so you have this view, and then you can click here to table, and it'll actually put it in that tabular format, and you can see the different persons, so the elements or nodes, and you can see the connections in the other view, which
upper right, yeah.
Yeah, so you can say elements, or you can go to connections. And there's another, I haven't really used loops that much, but you can see this is the same thing where Alex is connected to Tom. This is how they're connected.
Nice. I'm staying on for the working session, so I might have a couple more nerdy questions to ask there.
But I think the critical thing about that is, yeah, the map is based on the database, but how that data gets in there is each element is actually producing the data, right, through the survey. So, you know, you're not like grabbing the data from someplace. People are creating it. Every entity, every data point is creating it.
And that's what really drew me to this, because, you know, I was kind of blown away with how much faster you can survey if people are involved in the mapping process itself. And you know, to me, I think Christina and I recently had a discussion about this, where I think the next evolution could be based on the interactions that people share. So, you know, like the lunch meetings that I had before, and even the virtual events that my organization is doing now, as long as people opt in and know clearly where their data is going to be used, it could say, you've self-reported this. Not only have you self-reported this, but we can automatically grab from an actual database that you and Christine went to this Network Innovation Summit. And so that's more of a quantitative data point, not, you know, user generated. That can, I think, help make it quicker, you know, make it even more real time.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. So I'm going to wrap up. So just, if you want to learn more, there's a couple things you can do. One is Kara and so Steph, I was not thinking, because I was being very literal in my interpretation, when you asked about there being a Twin Cities map. There is not a Twin Cities map, but there is a community of practice map with the people who are learning this. And so Kara put a link to the opt-in form for that in the chat, so that you can, if we would love you all to be on our map. It'll give you a step-by-step process through the whole thing, and then you'll have an example that you can learn from and you can play with, and hopefully find people to reach out to help you learn. So Kara put that link in. There's also, we have a Slack team, which Kara will now put a link to the Slack team. So if you're not in our team, feel free to join. And many of us are in there and happily answer questions as you're working and they're coming up. And then we also have an online knowledge base, which is always in development and is not totally complete, but has the beginning basics for working, thinking about how to get started, what is a social system map, how to use the tools, etc. So Kara has put the map link, the Slack link, and the knowledge base link into the chat. She will also send out within the next 24, 48 hours, a follow-up email with the recording of this session and all those links as well. So if you haven't grabbed them right now and you don't panic, they will come soon in an email. Watch for them. So I'm gonna say, let's all unmute ourselves. And those of you who are jumping off now, let's say, thank you for coming. And I just wanna say, I'll count down 3, 2, 1 as soon as everybody's unmuted. And we will say our goodbye greetings to each other all together, and then stick around if you want to talk some more. So 3, 2, 1.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Christy.
Bye.
Thanks, Kara.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Mauricio.